I never could have imagined that one moment would shift the course of my life, leading me down a path I had never even considered. My name is Emma, and I'm 24 years old. After finishing college, I returned to my childhood home in a small coastal town. It's a place where everything feels familiar: the sway of every tree, the soft rustling of the grass, the distant murmur of waves breaking on the shore. At an age when I should be out there fighting for my future, building a career, and stepping into adulthood, I find myself avoiding it. Maybe part of me is afraid that embracing the responsibilities of grown-up life will sweep away the peace and simplicity that I've come to cherish. Right now, there is nothing to worry about. Each morning, I'm greeted by the comforting scent of fresh-baked goods wafting from my mother's kitchen. My father sits on the porch with his black coffee, lost in the pages of his favorite books. As for me, I enjoy sitting by the window, gazing out at the endless blue sea, letting the sunlight gently kiss my skin. It feels like something out of a dream, a perfect moment frozen in time, where the world slows down, and I can simply breathe and exist in this peaceful space. But deep inside, I couldn't shake off a vague sense of unease. Sometimes I wondered if this peace would last forever, or if it was just the calm before the storm. My family, from my parents to myself, are all open-minded, talkative, and lively. Family gatherings are always filled with laughter and endless stories. But Thomas, my younger brother, who is 6 years younger than me, is a different world. Thomas always keeps a quiet, somewhat cold, and incomprehensible demeanor. I remember when he was little, he was a happy child, smiling a lot, innocent like the mornings, and we were very close. The afternoons running around the yard, building sand castles, or hiding in the corner of the house whispering secrets only the two of us knew. All our memories that I cherished. Thomas's smile at that time was the light that made me feel peaceful. But then, over time, he gradually changed as he grew older. Thomas became less talkative, seemingly shutting himself away in a world off his own, even when the family was having parties or going on vacations. He kept a stoic face. If everyone around him did not exist, Thomas would often sit in a corner, his eyes staring vaguely into the distance, or glued to his phone. I often saw my mother trying to draw him into family conversations, but only getting short answers. Sometimes distant silence. My father used to say he just needs time to find himself. But I couldn't help but wonder what had made Thomas like this. The distance between Thomas and I grew. Over the years, our conversations became less frequent. Only short sentences when we happened to meet in the kitchen or living room. There were times when I wanted to break the silence, to pull Thomas back to the brilliant world of childhood that we shared. But then I hesitated, as if I were standing in front of a door that I had no right to pass through. I was afraid. Not afraid of Thomas, but afraid of touching something he wanted to hide. Afraid that I would destroy the wall he had tried to build around himself. Then the signs began to become clearer at every family meal. While my father, mother, and I gathered together, chatting and laughing, Thomas's chair was often empty the first few times. My mother would still call up the stairs, her voice full of gentleness, "Thomas, come down to eat." But the response was only silence, or sometimes a short answer echoing down, "I'm not hungry." My mother often sighed, and my father just shook his head and said, "Leave him alone when he wants to eat. He can come down himself." But I couldn't ignore him. One night, when the dinner was ready, my mother called again, but there was still no answer. I decided to go to Thomas's room, to call him down. Walking up the familiar wooden stairs, I heard my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. When I stood in front of Thomas's door, I heard the sound of a game coming from outside. Actually, this was not unusual. Thomas often played games alone, immersed in a world that he could control. Where no one would bother or judge him, the door was still closed. As usual, Thomas had a habit of locking the door, and every time he wanted to enter, my mother Ori had to knock on the door, waiting for him to open it. But this time it was not locked. I didn't know if Thomas forgot or did it on purpose. But the door was not locked. I hesitated for a moment, then thought of scaring him, to tease him, like we used to do when we were kids. My hand gently pushed the door, and it opened without making a sound. But what I saw inside left me speechless. Thomas was sitting in front of his computer. But he wasn't playing a game, he was staring at a video. and the images on it made my heart clench. It was an adult video. And what shocked me the most was how Thomas looked. His face was red, his eyes never leaving the screen. He was barely wearing anything except his underwear. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to say in that moment. I froze. I wanted to turn away, to leave the room immediately. But my body felt like it was pinned to the ground. Part of me was shocked. Part of me was embarrassed for him. But the bigger part was sadness, an inexplicable pain. Why was my once innocent, once bright as the sun little brother now so lonely that he had to sink into this to find release? Thomas didn't seem to notice me. I stopped in front of the door, my hand clutching the handle. My eyes were still glued to the image of him in front of the computer. But I tried to control myself, to suppress the emotions that were churning in my chest. My hand shook as I slowly pulled the door closed. Try not to make a sound. I didn't want Thomas to know that I had seen what I shouldn't have seen once the door was closed. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. My heart was pounding, as if it was about to jump out of my chest. I stood in front of the door for a few seconds, letting myself calm down, then knocked lightly on the door, as if I had just arrived. "Thomas, come down to dinner," I said, trying to keep my voice as casual as possible. It took a long time for a response from inside. "Yes, I'll be right down." When the door opened, Thomas was standing there, still looking cold, but I knew better. Because I had seen what he was doing before I knocked, a feeling of suffocation filled me. But I didn't let it show. I just nodded and turned away, leaving him in the room that I knew had become his secret world. I sat down at the dining table. My mind blank. Mom and Dad were talking as usual, but I couldn't concentrate. Every word seemed to come from far away. Part of me wanted to tell them what had happened, but I couldn't. It wasn't something I could say easily. I felt like I had crossed a line I shouldn't have crossed that night. Thomas came down for dinner later than usual. He kept his face calm, his eyes fixed on no one, and he answered his mother's questions in a short, indifferent voice. I knew why. He didn't want to look me in the eye. I avoided his gaze, too. But my heart was on fire. What I had seen, what I knew, all kept going around in my head like an endless loop. In the days that followed, things got stranger. Every time I saw Thomas, my heart would burn, my face would flush, and I couldn't explain why. Something inside me wanted to break out, to break the shell I was trying to build. Every time Thomas looked at me, even briefly, I felt like I was being exposed, not because he knew what I had seen, but because I felt like I was slowly learning more about him in an unwanted and confusing way. From then on, I started to pay more attention to Thomas, not out of curiosity, but because I couldn't stop thinking about what he was going through. He was no longer the carefree younger brother of the past, but now quiet, distant. As I immersed in a world he built himself to escape reality. Thomas often disappeared into his room, rarely participated in family conversations, and showed coldness to everyone. Many times I wanted to talk frankly to him, but every time I thought about it, I hesitated, that afraid that everything would change forever. I realized that the relationship between me and Thomas was different from before. The invisible distance between us grew bigger and bigger, full of secrets and conflicts. I didn't know if I had the courage to break it, but I understood that from now on, my life with Thomas would no longer be peaceful. Then one day, my parents were out, saying they wouldn't be back for another 2 days. The house was quieter than usual, except for my footsteps on the wooden floor and the occasional noise from upstairs. I didn't see Thomas all day, not even when I set the table for lunch. Part of me wanted to think he was lost in his own world, but another part of me couldn't help but worry. The image of last time suddenly came back to me, making my chest feel heavy. That evening, after I finished preparing dinner, I decided to go up and call Thomas, holding the warm tray of food. I walked up the stairs with my heart pounding. A strange feeling of excitement clung to me, as if I was about to face something unpredictable. As I approached Thomas's door, the familiar sounds echoed through the room again. The sound of games, the sound of guns, and the lively background music. But this time I understood better. That gaming noise wasn't the innocence I thought it would be. It was more like a disguise, a way to distract those around me. I stood in front of the closed door, trying to control my rapid breathing. My hand rested on the doorknob, gently turning it, wondering if he had locked the door. Strangely enough, The door was unlocked this time. A wave of mixed emotions rushed through me. Both curious and fearful, my hand gently pushed the door open, just enough so that I could peek inside without making a sound. But this time, everything was different as soon as the door opened a small crack. I froze in front of me. It was not the image of Thomas sitting in front of the computer screen ACI had expected. Instead, he was standing there right next to the door. As if waiting for me, the light from the computer screen shone out, illuminating a dark corner of the room. On the screen, it was not the game that sounded like a fake sound, but adult videos that were playing continuously. The scene left me frozen. Thomas was wearing only a pair of shorts, his upper body bare, his eyes calmly looking straight at me. There was no panic or fear like last time. On the contrary, he was strangely calm, as if he had been waiting for this. Sister Thomas spoke, his voice low and even, without any confusion. "Do you want to come in?" His words stunned me. I felt like I could no longer hold the tray of food in my hands. It slipped from my hands and fell to the ground with a loud bang, food spilling all over the floor. But Thomas didn't notice. He just stared at me, his eyes piercing through my every thought, as if trying to guess how I would respond. I wanted to say something, to react, but my throat was tight. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, but from an indescribable feeling of chaos. I couldn't understand myself at that moment. Before I could do anything, Thomas stepped forward, his arm reaching out to grab my wrist cold firm. He pulled me into the room, closing the door behind him. The space inside overwhelmed me. The room was unimaginably messy, completely different from what I thought of the little brother I once loved. Things were strewn everywhere, clothes strewn across the bed, empty soda cans scattered across the floor. Music was continued to play on the computer screen, making it hard to believe that this was the world Thomas was immersed in. "Thomas, turn off the computer," I said, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. But the tremor in my voice was unmistakable. Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, I saw a small smile appear on his face, a smile I'd never seen on him before. There was something about his eyes and smile that made me feel uneasy, as if he were deliberately challenging me, a little ambiguous, a little playful. It made me shiver. But then Thomas stood up. Still smiling, he walked over to the computer, slowly turning off the monitor. The room became strangely quiet, except for the sound of our soft breathing. I watched him, a jumble of emotions in my heart, confused, worried, and also something I couldn't name. Sitting in Thomas's room made me unable to believe that this was my once cheerful, innocent little brother. Some part of me felt like I had lost the boy I once was, the one who once shone like the sun, and now I was left with a strange Thomas, full of mystery, and perhaps a lot of pain that he had never told me. Thomas suddenly rushed forward, wrapping his arms tightly around me. That action made me jump. Completely unable to react, he buried his face in my shoulder, his voice hoarse and full of restraint. "I saw you." I couldn't take it anymore. Those words were like a shock to me, making me unable to believe what I had just heard. My heart was pounding, but I still tried to stay calm. I put my hand on Thomas's shoulder, trying to push him away. My voice stern, "Thomas, calm down. You can't be like this." But Thomas didn't listen. He squeezed tighter, his body shaking as if he was fighting with himself. "No, sister, I can't stop," he said, his voice choked, his eyes closed, as if he was caught in an uncontrollable flow of emotion. I started to panic. "Thomas, stop. This isn't right," I said louder, my voice stern. But he still didn't let go. A feeling of suffocation and helplessness filled me. Thomas was no longer himself, as if he was sinking into a place where reason no longer existed. Finally, I had no choice but to shout, "Thomas, stop right now." My shout echoed in the small room, like a thunder breaking the stifling atmosphere. He paused, his body stiff, then slowly let go of me. Thomas's face was now filled with confusion. He took a few steps back, avoiding my eyes. I could see the conflict in his heart, mixed with fear as he realized what he had done. I took a deep breath to calm myself, even though my whole body was shaking from what had just happened. "Thomas, sit down," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but stern. "We need to talk." Thomas hesitated for a moment, still not daring to look directly at me. But he finally sat down on the edge of the bed. I sat across from him, trying to steady my breathing and my emotions, looking at my broth there in front of me. Looking like a child who had just made a big mistake, I couldn't help but feel heartbroken. Thomas, why are you like this? I began, my voice soft but firm. What's going on with you? I need you to tell me the truth. Thomas bowed his head, silent for a long moment, as if trying to sort out the chaotic thoughts in his head. Then, little by little, he began to tell. Thomas sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped together, as if trying to muster up the courage to speak. I waited, not urging, though my heart was still pounding from what had just happened. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and trembling, as if each word was heavy. I had no friends in class. He began, his eyes still not meeting mine. No one wanted to hang out with me. No one talked to me. At first, I thought it was just that I didn't fit in, but as time went on, I felt more and more alone. They looked at me like I was invisible. That feeling, you don't understand. It drove me crazy. Thomas paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. One day I was home, lying on my bed scrolling through Facebook to kill time. I came across a link to a website. I didn't mean to click on it, but I don't know why I was curious. He paused, his fingers clasped together, his shoulders shaking slightly. I could feel the difficulty in his words, but I stayed silent, letting him continue. From then on, I started to change. He said, his voice choked. At first, it was just curiosity, but then I found myself unable to stop. It was like something kept pulling me further and further away from everything. I started to withdraw, hide in my room, sink deeper into that world. You see, I couldn't control it anymore. I looked at him, heartbroken and confused. Thomas, the little brother I had thought so happy and strong, now sat before me, lost and surrounded by emotions he couldn't shake. Thomas, I said, my voice quiet but firm, this isn't right. I can't go on like this. It's only making me sink deeper, making me lose myself. He looked up at me, his eyes red, the tears starting to well up, but I don't know what to do. Since I feel like a failure, I'm afraid people will laugh at me. I'm afraid even you will hate me. Hearing those words, my heart clenched. I couldn't imagine Thomas going through all this alone. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. You're not a failure, Thomas, you're just lost, but you have to stop. Right now I'm here, and I'll help you. Thomas bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he said, his voice choking. I don't know what I did. I'm sorry. I made you worry. I gently wiped away the tears rolling down his cheeks. It's okay, Thomas. The important thing is that you have to try to change from now on. I believe you can do it. From that night on, I knew I couldn't turn my back on Thomas. The image of my brother sitting there, tears rolling down his cheeks, admitting the pain kept hidden inside, made me realize that he needed a companion, someone who truly cared and didn't judge, and I decided that I would be that person. I started to pay more attention to Thomas, paying attention to the smallest details. Every time I was home, I always paid attention to what he was doing. If Thomas stayed in his room for too long, I would find a reason to call him out. Sometimes it was to ask him a random question about dinner. Sometimes it was to ask him to help me with something like cleaning or fixing a small item. I didn't want him to spend too much time alone in that room, which had previously become his closed world at first. Thomas seemed a little uncomfortable with my attention. He responded to my calls with short answers, sometimes with tired sighs, but I did not give up. I understood that for him to truly change, patience and sincerity were needed. As time passed, I gradually noticed that he began to change. Thomas no longer kept his usual cold face. He began to smile more. And that smile, although initially shy, gradually became natural and warm. One day, when the whole family was having dinner, Thomas suddenly told a funny story he had experienced at school. His voice was stuttering at first, but when he saw that everyone was listening attentively and smiling, he became more confident. It was the first time in a long time that I saw Thomas truly participate in a family conversation. My parents' eyes lit up, and they did not spare praise for him. My mother smiled and said, Thomas, you tell stories so gracefully. Next time, tell me more. My father patted him on the shoulder and encouraged him. That's right, keep being confident. Thomas, you're good. Those compliments, I know, had a big impact on Thomas. He started to open up more, actively participating in conversations instead of just sitting quietly in a corner. I noticed that he no longer stayed in his room for hours like before. Instead, he spent time outside, sometimes helping my mother with chores in the kitchen or helping me father take care of the small flower garden in front of the house. At times like that, I looked at Thomas with joy. He was different, no longer the quiet, closed, and lost little brother before, I also reminded myself that although the things I did might be small, little by little, they were contributing to bringing Thomas back to the light. I couldn't change everything for him, but I could be the one by his side, reminding him that he was not alone whenever I saw him struggling with his studies or having difficulties. I was always ready to listen and help. I tried to create an environment where he could feel safe and love. My parents also noticed Thomas's positive changes. My mother couldn't hide her happiness when she saw him happier and more proactive. He's really grown up, she told me one time when we were cleaning the kitchen. I just smiled, not telling my mother what Thomas had gone through. But in my heart, I knew that it was the result of his own efforts. As for me, I felt happier every day when I saw Thomas gradually regain the light in Highseas, although sometimes he still had moments of contemplation. I knew that was normal. Most importantly, I didn't let him get lost alone and stray into the dark path. I know this journey is still long, but I believe that with the care and love of my family, Thomas will continue to change, continue to mature and find himself, and no matter what, I am always ready to be by his side. As a sister and a companion in life, Thomas' life, after stormy days, finally returned to peace. From a quiet, distant boy full of hidden wounds, Thomas gradually opened up, became happier and more sociable. He not only found his smile again, but also found the connection with his family, something he had lost for a long time. Seeing Thomas change, I not only felt relieved, but also learned a lot from that journey. Those days taught me that sometimes our loved ones can sink into darkness that they cannot escape on their own. Signs such as withdrawal, isolation, or unusual behavior should not be ignored, because their silent cries for help, what they need is not judgment or pressure, but a strong enough shoulder, someone willing to listen and patiently help them find the light in life again. Thomas's story is also a reminder that negative environmental influences, especially loneliness and the way we use the internet, can have profound consequences. Just one stray step, one moment of curiosity, can send a young person spiraling down a rabbit hole. But importantly, they don't have to walk those paths alone. The care and love of family is the light that helps them step out of the darkness. To all those who are reading this story, I want to share a lesson that I have learned. Pay attention to the loved ones around you. Don't take small changes in them for granted, and don't be afraid to ask and talk. Loving and care can sometimes change a person's life. Let them know that you are always here, ready to listen and share. Finally, remember that we all have moments of weakness and loss, but with the right love and companionship, we can all come back stronger. Never let anyone feel lonely in the most difficult days. Care, no matter how small, can create miracles, and that is the power of love. Our story ends here. If you find it interesting, please give a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you for listening.